Hey guys, Nick here, and today we will be seeing how far Glenn and Negan's rivalry will go, since it is beginning and progressing way more so than Negan and Maggie's rivalry. That's where we're gonna kinda find out today. Now, this is part 5 to What If Negan Killed Maggie, the remake. Now, to touch up base upon after the last episode, Tara returns to Alexandria per the norm after Oceanside, and Eugene, it's actually a much better return for Tara, because even though Denise is dead, that's still a sad thing, but Glenn is still alive, and the saviors have been dealt with. So, while Denise's death is sad for Tara, Glenn and the whole savior thing being solved, that kinda warms it up better, I would say. So, after hearing that the saviors have been dealt with, albeit Negan and everyone still being alive, not really sitting well with Tara as well as a bunch of other people, she feels it's best to return to Oceanside to tell the Oceanside people the good news. And even though Cindy told her never to come back ever, after Tara says the war with the saviors is over and explains all what happened, albeit with Cindy and them not really taking this too seriously, Tara kinda seems like she's telling the truth, so they're happy they don't have to worry about Negan and stuff anymore. But I'll touch base on more with Oceanside here in a minute. Now, Negan is still in the cell, just not forever, because he still has to atone for what he did to Maggie and Abraham, as well as a bunch of other communities. So he's still not getting off the hook, but he's not going to be kept in there forever like his canon counterpart was supposed to be. Now, Glenn has to recover, sort of like what I did with Shane, except much less worse, because Glenn only got slammed in the face with the bat instead of getting hit in the head, so he didn't lose his eyeball, but he still did slammed across the face with Lucille. And even though it's lucky enough that he didn't break his jaw, it did badly scar and injure his face, so Glenn has to take the time to recover. And Olivia is still alive, so even though Denise is dead, I could see Tara and Olivia getting together here. Now then, time to, before we talk about Alpha and the Whisperers, there are a few other things we need to touch base upon before we get into that territory, because there's still a little bit of story here to get to. First off, there is one soul group that is missing here. Jadis and Scavengers are no more, thanks to the likes of Jesus. So, not the hugest deal, but they did serve a key part in season 7, 8, and kinda 9. Well, at least Jadis in 9. And the kingdom is still around, and in seemingly perfect condition. And as for the residents, Carol, even though she's very broken with the death of Maggie, because if you guys watched near the end of season 6, you'll understand why that is the case, because of the whole getting kidnapped by Paula and the Saviors thing. I feel that Ezekiel would eventually warm up or Carol would warm up to Ezekiel in the manner that she wouldn't be secluded anymore, because she already wanted to be on her own, but Maggie's death sort of pushed that further. But with Ezekiel, I feel that they would connect sooner or later. Morgan is also still residing in the kingdom, as I've done before, at least with my What If Rick Spared Shane remake. Not really too many other stories that I had with him doing that. But anyways, he teaches Henry and Benjamin the stick like he does in canon. And that develops quite nicely, because since the saviors are now dealt with, that means that Benjamin is going to survive, along with Shiva, Richard, and several other kingdom members that got killed in Season 8. So, a little bit of a dub there for Ezekiel and the King, or the Kingdom. Now, for Hilltop, there really isn't anyone who has died there, except the whole deal with Ethan, but that was before the story even became a thing, and Gregory, who got his throat slit by Glenn. But who gets to become the leader? Well, it's either a combination of Tara or Jesus, like it was in canon, because even though Glenn did kill Gregory, and he would be the next most likely to be a leader, because Maggie was, I feel that he would eventually become the leader, but he still has to recover, so if he does become the leader, it's not right now, because he still has to recover, and he's still not getting over the fact that Maggie's dead, and I don't think being a leader for Hilltop would really sit in well with Glenn's mind right now. He has a lot to think about, especially after even talking with the whole not wanting to kill Negan thing with Rick in the last episode. Now at Alexandria, Gabriel does not lose his sight, or, half of it, because he doesn't have that whole deal where he ran into Negan and they had to get out of the little shed there, or wherever they were. They didn't go together, and that whole thing didn't happen, so he still has part of his sight. And for Carl and Rick, they go out to save Sadiq, and it's both of them this time, which means that Carl does not get bit here, and he actually gets to survive. So, that's another good thing for Carl, because I've had him survive in a lot of my stories. Rosita and Spencer, like my last story, or my last remake story, get together. So, that actually progresses rather nicely too. Because none of my other stories, besides my What If Rick Spared Shane remake, and now this one, I've never really had them get together. So, it's nice. Eugene crafts bullets for all the communities, I feel would be the case, or mainly Alexandria, because since he did not join Negan here, I feel that his construction of the bullets would continue, except this time it would be for Alexandria and mainly and the other communities, because since this is so early on into not even Season 8, I would feel, he would still do this. And Eric is still alive here, which would put Aaron in a much more better mental state, which I've also touched base upon before. Rick and Michonne still have their relationship and get it progressed, and that kind of was already the thing with Season 6, but into Season 7 it grew way more. And never really had a situation or a story where I talked about Rick and Michonne specifically, so it's nice. Now, Sasha is still alive here, but all alone, but that will change later on in the story. And I know with my original, I had that whole thing where I said Rosita and Sasha would be with Glenn. I now realize that maybe that was a little bit silly, but Sasha will get with someone. I'm just not going to say that right now, and you already know who Rosita gets with because I just explained it. Now, for Morales, because he eventually becomes known to different members of the group, and the name is mentioned, and with Rick, Carl, Daryl, Glenn, and Carol all being alive still, I feel that even though people like Daryl and maybe Glenn would not want him around, especially after all of what's happened, I feel like Glenn more than Daryl would warm up to the idea of welcoming Morales back, because Daryl might have not cared much about Morales in the moment where he killed him in canon, but Glenn, I feel, would be even different, even if he was still struggling over the whole Negan thing. So, that means that Morales, like other stories, at least for now, gets to survive. And remember how I said that there would be more story to cover before the whole Whisperer arc? This is about to touch base upon that here right now, because Tanya doesn't really like the idea that the Saviors are still around, even if the peace has been subsided, because she thinks that this could very well be a trick to bring them down again, and even worse, and that Rick and everybody else is being played into it. And she still can't get over the death of everyone that Oceanside's lost, and eventually talks Cindy, albeit reluctantly, into finding a way to kill the Saviors that at least killed their people, and possibly even Negan while they're at it. Now Tara, because she's been spending, I feel, or at least she would be spending, a decent amount of time in Oceanside, would hear over this and catch them in the act, and there's really nothing that they can say or do to, like, change what they've said, because Tara caught them red-handed. But the plan to ultimately do something about it backfires on Tara almost instantly. Sort of how it did whenever Tara returned in Season 7 to Oceanside. And now, Tanya and Cindy have a hostage, but under much different circumstances. How will this go? How far will Tanya and Cindy and all of Oceanside go to kill the Saviors this time around? And what do you think will happen further into the story? And that's where we leave things for the moment. Hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. I know there wasn't much of Glenn and Negan's rivalry to talk about, like I said there would be at the beginning of the episode, but that was more or less to explain that their rivalry will be much different than Maggie and Negan's original rivalry was and still is. So, I hope you guys enjoyed nonetheless, and I will see you guys in the next episode.